Welcome to the Try What Walk, Crossing Borders, Blending Perspectives online lecture series. My name is Janne Liburd. I'm Professor of Tourism, and this module is a collaboration with researchers Dr. Bodil Blichfeldt and Dr. Eva Dudal, entitled Towards Sustainable Development of Cultured World Heritage Nature. Our aim is to advance understanding beyond conceptualizations of nature as simply different or other to humankind and human creation. And instead, we're going to argue that it is important to embrace relational approaches based on holistic understandings of sustainable development, that is, social, cultural, economic, and environmental aspects are considered as equally important. My presentation is based on 5 recent articles with Eva Dudal and Bodil Blichfeldt, as you can see listed here. The only single-authored work is Eva's Ph.D. dissertation, which you can see as the first listed on this slide. Now, the purpose of our first listed article, Transcending the Nature-Cultural Dichotomy from 2021, is to investigate and discuss what nature, respectively culture, is, using the Danish part of the Wadden Sea as a case. We're going to call for more refined understandings of nature simply as different from humankind and human creation in order to help protect and safeguard world heritage. The problem with the Western nature-culture dichotomy is essentially that many, if not all, rural areas of the world are not fully untouched by cultural influences or human activity. Indeed, most areas across the globe are shaped by centuries or even millennia of farming, forestry, fishery, other cultivation, land reclamation, and maybe also tourism. And that makes the Wadden Sea a unique area as a case study because of its rich cultural heritage of land reclamation, of built heritage as well, including seawalls and dikes. So I'll give you some illustrations of this in order to demonstrate that nature is not only wild, untouched, untamed, or free from human intervention and settlement. The methods involved in our work from 2018 to 2022 were designed around 3 main activities. We had 48 participants in total, and the first main activity involved 14 sessions lasting each 5 to 8 hours with 19 residents. They included go-alongs and a sedentary interview session. So after being in nature with people, we would sit down and then do a more conventional interview. The second activity involved 10 half-day nature-based activities and interviews and co-design workshops with 10 older male residents. And the participation in a range of activities were added to this in the Wadden Sea National Park, including small-scale ethnography, where we analyzed about 90 pictures of tourists, photos that were entitled or classified as My Wadden Sea. Interestingly enough, with the exception of the second activity, both the first and the third involved people based on an open call and self-enrollment, and most of those were rather active, they were fit, and they were extensively engaged and appreciated the Wadden Sea National Park. The second activity was very different because that particular activity involved day tours with older male residents who were less active, less articulate, less fit, and much less engaged than the other older adults. Most of the active adults took on the role as tour guides, and they took us oftentimes just walking in the national park, but also running, bicycling, horseback riding, fishing, hunting, gathering herbs, berries, mushrooms, etc. And that meant that doing things together in nature, with nature, also enabled a different way of relating to our research participants, which we could then explore in more depth during the sedentary interviews. These different types of interventions and what we've entitled go-alongs and very hybrid mobile methods enabled us to better understand and also look into how people physically or bodily relate to nature, where we move beyond just being talking heads as researchers when we engage actively with research participants. Eva Duedal and Bodil Blichfeldt have written a very nice article about this, which I would encourage you to read as well. Now, part of our findings draw on a project called InnoAging, and essentially here we were working with the 10 older male and also our Center for Active Aging at the University of Southern Denmark in order to innovate aspects of active aging, active healthy aging in nature. Now, we have published the documented health effect, and that is widely known throughout the literature that being active in nature contributes to better health. But it is still puzzling that despite that knowledge, many people find it very, very difficult to actually get out there. And here males, and particularly older males, are more exposed to lifestyle diseases and a poor quality of life, which also allowed us then to address gender equality as part of the Sustainable Development Goals in order to reduce inequalities and enable more responsible consumption and production. So what have we actually learned in addition to that? Well, initially we expected that the findings would differ quite vastly across the 3 different interventions, i.e. with active people in nature and those who were less active. That turned out actually that it was much more complex than that. And the intertwined understandings and appreciations of nature and culture really did not allow for that segregation between nature and culture, which is commonly sort of a commonly held understanding. And some of that is illustrated in the photos below, where we see the interrelated nature. So at one part, of course, you can see nature captured in the animals, the seals. You see the Wadden Flats, you see the cows grazing on the island of Fanø. But in the background of that particular picture, you will also see the industrial signifiers of the harbor of Esbjerg, the chimney stacks, the windmills. We see a ship in the channel coming towards the harbor of Esbjerg, which at times were also augmented or directly pointed out by our research participants, that we cannot understand nature without culture. Ellen, one of our research participants, said, well, it is a conscious choice for me because it depends on what I'm drawn to. So sometimes she does not want to look at the harbor of Esbjerg, so she walks the opposite way, where she finds that it is more nature and where there's opportunities to be, as she phrased it, in the middle of nothingness, and where she's far from what she feels are civilized circumstances. These illustrations below show tourists' representation of interrelated culture and nature. And they point to, for instance, the loch in Bellum, the beaches alongside the Wadden Sea shoreline, where in some instances cars are allowed, and lastly also an oyster tour. Participants point to the historical and cultural heritage of the area, and that they use as a reference to land reclamation efforts and human settlement as having cultivated and cultured nature into what it is today. So as opposed to defining the Wadden Sea as either nature or culture, our findings actually accentuate how participants dynamically relate and enact intertwined webs of understanding, interpretation, and appreciation of the Wadden Sea, even when, as it says in the quote here, we know that it is now UNESCO World Heritage, but we cannot even think about the natural world heritage without nature. We need culture to preserve nature. That is the picture we saw before, cattle that graze the meadows so that they don't go into willow. So what can we learn from all of this? Well, first and foremost, our research has shown how residents and tourists, second home owners also care about and relate to nature and culture in the Wadden Sea National Park with others in very complex manners. at the heart of which is nature that is not other to humankind or human creation. This is a significant input to the concept of stewardship, which is central in sustainability science. And you could say that stewardship, as defined here, is a way of looking after something or someone, which suggests that those involved benefit from putting the interest of others above their own and pursuing actions that generate their own intrinsic rewards. Our findings also suggest that there are very many different ways to intentionally look after or care for, if not even love, the Wadden National Park. But less attention so far has been paid to how we proactively can use these different interpretations of stewardship and engagement to help protect and safeguard World Heritage. It is also important to know that the notion or the concept of collaboration is very different from other forms of cooperation or partnership as proposed in SDG number 17, because collaboration does not imply a division of labor. Collaboration rests on the hypothesis that the sum of work is more than its individual parts. So through collaboration, you will generate something that might be even of competitive advantage with others that you could not achieve on your own. And that too, following Huxham, is a quintessential expression of an ethical ongoing involvement of others, that is also drawing on Yamal and Menzel's work, and their sense of values, which include not only human beings but also the non-human other. A few management and science advice as my second part of the conclusions. It means that taking seriously the concept of collaboration, it must be broadened beyond the traditional domains and sectors with civic society and stewards based on a holistic, systemic approach. And for science, it means that we need to start daring to experiment and to bring forth these latent opportunities for sustainable development with others instead of working in scientific silos, and of course to allocate funding to do so. Now, looking beyond the Wadden National Park, from New Zealand and recent work by Cower and Becken in 2021, both of whom work in New Zealand's Department of Conservation, they actually propose a new system of governance in tourism where greater consideration is paid to the root system, that is, the local values, the agreed upon rules and traditions and relationships, which you can see in the illustration to the right. And so tourism here is simply an exemplar of not just using nature and the world as a furnishing resource, but it becomes a driver of sustainable development, captured in the circle above, that says tourism gives back more than it takes. It is also indicative of the fact that it is no longer enough to simply sustain the world, but we need to do better in order to refurbish what is already there or to engage into regenerative actions. I will challenge you now to think about what your advice should be when it comes to the sustainable development of the Wadden Sea. There are so many intertwined interests and stakeholders, and a report published in Dutch, which reads something along the line of who's the boss of the what, I encourage you to look into and consider what will be your advice to policymakers, tourism practitioners, and fellow students. Last but not least, here's a list of the sources that I've referenced in my presentation here today, which you, of course, are more than encouraged to look into in order to get a deeper understanding of this very complex topic of sustainable development, culture, nature, world heritage in the Wadden Sea. When you look at the Collaboration for Sustainable Tourism Development book on the left, you will also see an image known as the phenomenon of black sun. Starlings here are captured in flight just before the sunset in the Danish part of the Wadden Sea, and right before they settle for the night, the starlings gather in large flocks, of which some count several 100,000 birds. It's a spectacular phenomenon of collaboration, because the starlings actually accomplish to do what no single bird could do alone, namely fend off larger predators such as hawks and eagles. Their eloquent formation in the sky have become a major tourist attraction, which by virtue, of course, calls for collaboration to underpin sustainable tourism development in the Wadden Sea World Heritage National Park. Thank you very much for your attention.